in Yavapai County, Arizona Territory, on the 13th of December, 1883, at a way station on the old Beale Road 40 miles east of Williams. A woman of 23 watched her stepmother take $61 out of her carpet bag in front of 9 other people, and then explained to all of them why it had never been hers. The station smelled of wet wool and coal oil, and the mutton stew nobody had finished. There was a storm coming down off the mountain. Every man in that room had been watching the light go the color of a bruise since 3 o'clock. And the westbound coach standing in the yard was the last one the company meant to run before the road closed for the season, and there were 9 seats on it and 11 people wanting them. "You will want to hear this from me and not from her," Hester Carew said to the station agent, holding the money, speaking loud enough for the room. "This girl took $340 off my husband in Flagstaff in November. This is what is left of it. I am taking back what belongs to my family, and I would advise you not to extend her credit, nor a bed, nor anything else, because she is a thief, and I am sorry to say it of my own husband's daughter, but there it is." Tamsen Carew stood in the middle of that room with her hands open at her sides. She had earned every dollar of that 61 over 2 years at a boarding house in Flagstaff at $4 a week, and her keep. And she had counted it into a stocking every Saturday of those 2 years. And she had bought her own seat on that coach with it the week before. She did not steal $340 from her father. Her stepbrothers lost it at faro on the 21st of November, and she was the only person in that family who knew it, and had known it for 3 weeks, and had said nothing because saying it would have finished them. She looked past Hester at her father. Jory Carew was a Cornish hard rock miner out of Camborne, 61 years old, a man who had gone down a shaft at 11, and had never in his life been afraid of anything that could kill him. He was standing by the stove with his hat in his hands, and he did not look up, and he did not say one word, and that was the part Tamsen Carew carried out of that room and kept for the rest of her life. The agent, uncomfortable, said there were 9 seats and 11 fares, and the company would honor the paid ones. So the Carews boarded. Hester, Jory, Reuben, Sylvanus, and Tamsen stood in the yard in the first of the snow, with a carpet bag holding 1 dress, a comb, and her grandfather's candlestick, and no money, no ticket, and nowhere in the territory to be. The candlestick was a Cornish miner's spider, a foot of hand forged iron with a hooked handle, a spike for driving into a timber or a seam of ground, and a socket for a tallow candle. It had been her grandfather's at Dolcoath, and her father's after him, and it had crossed an ocean in a flour sack in 1874, and Hester had left it in the bag because it was worth about 40 cents. The last man to board stopped on the step. He was 37, in a canvas coat and a good hat pulled low, and there was scarring down the left side of his face and neck of the particular white ropey kind that comes from cold rather than fire, and his left hand, when he took hold of the rail, showed a thumb and 1 finger, and nothing else. He had been sitting in the corner of that station for an hour, and had not said a word to anybody. He looked at the woman standing in the yard in the snow. Then he stepped back down. "Ike," he said to the driver, "I am going up top with you. The hell you are. It is 9 degrees and dropping, and you of all people, I am going up top with you." He turned to Tamsen Carew and took his hat off, which no man had done to her in that room in the whole of the last quarter hour. "Ma'am, there is a seat inside with my name against it, and I would take it as a kindness if you would use it. It is paid through to Williams. I am not asking you for anything, and there is no obligation in it of any kind whatsoever. And if it makes it easier to take, you may consider that I would rather ride up top regardless, which happens to be the truth. Mister, you do not know one thing about me but what that woman just said in front of 9 people. No, ma'am. He put his hat back on. But I have been on a coach in weather like this before, and I know what that road is at night in December, and I am not going to stand in a yard and watch a person get left in it. My name is Wade Mercer. Get in out of the snow. Ike Bissell, 60 years old and 11 years a driver on that line, said afterward that he had never in his life seen a man take that particular seat and then give it away, and that he had argued about it for the better part of a mile, and that Wade Mercer did not answer him once. The run to Williams was 40 miles, and it took 11 hours. The storm came down off Bill Williams Mountain in the 3rd hour, and after that there was no road, only the memory of a road, and Ike Bissell drove it by the tops of the junipers and by God's own patience, while a man with 4 fingers on his left hand sat beside him on the box in a wind that took the temperature to 15 below and held it there. Inside, in the dark jammed knee-to-knee with 8 strangers, Tamsen Carew rode the whole 11 hours with her carpet bag on her lap, and her grandfather's candlestick in it, and her father's silence going round and round in her head, and did not sleep, and did not cry, and thought a great deal about a man sitting up in that wind for no reason she could see. They came into Williams at 9 the following morning. Williams sat at just under 7,000 feet under Bill Williams Mountain, a town 400 people and 2 years old, built on sawmills and cattle and the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, and the snow in the street was to the hubs, and the whole place was out to see whether the last coach had made it. Ike Bissell brought them in and hauled up, and there was a sound went through that crowd when the men on the ground saw who was on the box. Mercer rode topside? Somebody said. In that? And a man came up out of the crowd and took Wade Mercer under the arms and got him down off the box, because he could not do it himself by then, and the crowd closed round him. And Tamsen Carew stood in the door of that coach with her carpet bag and heard the whole story told over her head by strangers in about 90 seconds, the way a town tells the one story it has. Wade Mercer had been a passenger on the February coach in 1878, the one that went off the Beale Road in the storm with 11 aboard and did not come in. He had walked out of it on the second morning, gone 22 miles on foot for help, and come back with a party of 6, and they had got 9 of the 11 out alive over the 2 days following. It had cost him 3 fingers and the thumb of his left hand and most of the left side of his face, and he had never once in the 5 years since ridden anywhere but inside a coach in winter, because Ike Bissell would not have it otherwise, and because the whole of Yavapai County had agreed without ever discussing it that Wade Mercer had used up his portion of that particular weather. Nobody in that street had to explain to Tamsen Carew what he had spent to give her his seat. She worked it out in about 4 seconds, and it was the second time in 12 hours that something had been done to her in public that she could not answer. She went to work that same afternoon because there was nothing else to do and because she had not eaten since the way station. Dosha Prine kept the cookhouse that fed the Saginaw mill crews, 90 men through the door twice a day, and she was 58 and had come out from Missouri in 1871 and had buried a husband and built the business herself, and she hired Tamsen Carew at $2 a week and a cot off the kitchen after watching her break down a beef quarter for 11 minutes without being asked twice about anything. "I heard what they said about you at Beale Spring," Dosha said that first evening. "Word came in on the coach with you. I want you to know I heard it, and I want you to know I hired you anyway. and I am not going to ask you whether it is true. Because if it is true, you will steal from me, and I will find out. And if it is not true, then asking is just one more person putting it to you." She wiped her hands. "There is your cot. Supper is at 5, and breakfast is at 4, and I do not tolerate lateness or self-pity, and you have earned neither one so far." Tamsin Carew was 7 days in that town before she saw Wade Mercer again, and when she did, he had frost damage on both ears and 3 toes he nearly lost, and he was walking with a stick, and he made no reference to any of it whatever. He ran 260 head on Least Range, 4 miles south, and he came into Docia's twice a week for a meal, and he sat where he always sat. And it took Tamsin Carew 11 days to work up to saying anything to him beyond what he wanted on his plate. "I have not thanked you. There is no call to. There is every call to. Miss Mercer and I have been 11 days working out how to do it, without either of us having to sit through it, and I have not found a way, so I am simply going to say it plain." She put the coffee down. "You gave up your seat to a woman a room full of people had just been told was a thief, and it cost you 3 toes and your ears and I do not know what else, and you have not once since let anybody in this town say so in front of you. I do not know what to do with that. I have not been given a thing in my life that did not have a bill attached to it, and I do not know the manners of it." Wade Mercer turned his cup a quarter turn on the table. "Then let it lie," he said. "That is the manners of it. A thing given is not a debt, Miss Carew, and if it turns into one it was never given, it was lent, and I did not lend you anything." She stood there a moment. "That is the first sentence anybody has said to me in 3 weeks that I could put my whole weight on." "Then put your weight on it," said Wade Mercer, "and eat something. You have got a jaw on you like a fence rail, and Docia will have my hide." The weeks that followed had a shape to them, and the narrator will not pretend they were eventful, because their quiet was the whole of their worth. She cooked for 90 men twice a day and got good at it fast. She learned the town. She sent 1 letter to her father, care of the company office at Ehrenberg, and got nothing back, and stopped, and she walked. On the one afternoon a week, Docia turned her out of the kitchen, up the shoulder of Bill Williams Mountain on the Wood Road, because she had grown up in a mining family in a mining country, and had never once in her life been able to walk past a hole in the ground without looking into it. Wade Mercer walked with her twice in January, both times because she asked, and once because he had been hoping she would. "There," she said, the second time, and pointed 40 yards off the road at a black slot in the mountainside behind a screen of scrub oak, with a spoil heap fanned out below it going gray under the snow. Somebody drove an Adit in there and quit. "Prospect. 79. There is a dozen of them on this mountain, and not one of them ever paid. He drove it right, though. She was already climbing to it. See how he set the mouth in under the ledge so the water sheds off. That is a man who has done it before. She went 11 feet into the dark, running her hand along the wall, entirely at home, and came back out with her skirt wet to the knee, and her face lit up in a way he had not seen on it. 40 feet, near enough, and dry the whole way, and the ground is sound. My grandfather would have called that a good hole. You are the first person in 5 years to be glad about that hole, Miss Carew. My people have been Cornish miners 9 generations, Mr. Mercer. I was in a level at Dulcoth on my father's shoulders before I could read." She was scraping her boots. "A hole in the ground is the only thing in this world that keeps the same temper all year round. It is 50 degrees in there in July, and it is 50 degrees in there tonight, and there is not a house in this town you can say that of. Wade Mercer remembered that. The narrator would like it noted that he remembered it, and that neither of them had the least idea, on a Sunday afternoon in January, why it would matter. They stood close in the mouth of that adit for a moment longer than the conversation strictly required, out of the wind. Close enough that she could see the fine white lines of the cold scarring at his jaw, and he could see that she was looking at them and was not looking away. "It does not trouble me," she said, "in case that is what you are waiting to find out. It troubles most people. I am not most people, and you are not either, and I would take it as a kindness if we could both stop being surprised about it." Neither of them closed the distance. He stepped back into the wind first and held the scrub oak aside for her, and they walked down the wood road talking about cattle prices, and both of them thought about that mouth of that adit a good deal more than either let on. Before the trouble came up the Prescott Road, and it did, in the second week of February, on paper, with a seal on it, there was a good 6 weeks in that town, with a woman cooking for 90 men, and a man walking a wood road on Sundays who had not walked it with anybody in 5 years. If you have stayed with this story this far, stay a little longer. What comes next is the part that changes everything. And if you find yourself moved by tales of love that survived the worst the West could throw at them, the bell beneath this story is how we keep meeting like this. Deputy Sheriff Orrin Vale came into Williams on the 11th of February with a warrant sworn out at Prescott on the complaint of Hester Carew for the larceny of $340. He was 45, and he was not, the narrator will be fair, a wicked man. He was a tired man on a county salary who was paid $4 in mileage for every prisoner he delivered to the county seat, and who had worked out some years before that the easiest thing a deputy can do with a sworn complaint is serve it and let the court do the thinking. He came into Dosha Prine's cookhouse at 11 in the morning and read the warrant out in front of 40 men eating dinner. "There is a coach out Wednesday," he said. "You will go down to Prescott and answer it there." "On whose evidence?" "On a sworn complaint, miss, which is all the evidence a warrant wants." It was Wade Mercer who stood up from his table. Vale, he was quiet, and the room went quiet with him. "That complaint is sworn by a woman who took $61 out of this woman's own bag in front of 9 witnesses at Beale Spring on the 13th of December, and I was one of them, and Ike Bissell was another, and the station agent was a third. You have got a complaint from Prescott. I have got 3 witnesses standing in this county who watched the alleged thief get robbed. Then they can come to Prescott and say so. In February. Over that road. That is not my affair, Miss Mercer. No. It is mine. I will post whatever bond this county wants, and I will stand it myself. And I am telling you in front of 40 men that if you take that woman down that road in this weather for $4 and mileage, this county is going to hear about it for 20 years. A bond is set at Prescott by a judge, not at Williams by a cattleman. It cost him. The narrator sets that down plainly. There were men in that room who owed him their lives or their fathers' lives, and there were also men who bought cattle and lent money and sat on juries, and a man does not call a deputy sheriff a mercenary in public in a small town without paying something for it. 2 contracts he had for spring beef did not renew that year. He never mentioned it to her, and she found out anyway, in April, from Dokia, and did not mention it either. What Vale gave, and it was the whole of what he was willing to give, was a week. He would go when the weather broke, and not before. She told him her side of it that night, on the step of the cookhouse in the cold, and she told it plain, which is how the deepest kind comes out. They were not lying about the money being gone, she said. $340 is gone, and my father is ruined without it, and I have known since the 22nd of November exactly where it went, which is a faro layout on Front Street in Flagstaff, and I have known which of my stepbrothers took it, which is both of them, and I have not said one word. She had her arms wrapped round herself. You will want to know why. It is because my mother died in Michigan when I was 16, and my father did not speak for 4 months. And then he married Hester, and I watched him come back to life on account of her, and I made up my mind at 18 that I was not going to be the one to take that off him. So I let it sit, and she worked out that I was going to let it sit, and she built a whole thing on top of it. Her voice did not break, which was worse. That is my failing, Mr. Mercer, and I would rather you had it from me. I was not falsely accused by accident. I made myself the easiest person in that family to blame, and then I stood in a station house and was astonished when somebody did. Wade Mercer was quiet a long moment. I was 31 in that coach in 78, he said. There were 11 of us. There was a woman named Alma Spears, with 2 boys, and a drummer out of St. Louis, and a girl going to be married at Ash Fork. On the second morning I said I would walk out, and everybody agreed it was the thing to do, and I went. And I got to the Sacketon place at dark, and we came back the next day, and we got 9 out. He turned his hat over in his hands. The 2 we did not get were the drummer and the girl going to be married, and they had been alive when I left. I have gone over that walk about 9,000 times, and I have never once been able to find the 4 hours in it that would have made the difference, and I have never once stopped looking. He looked up. Everybody in this county calls me the man who saved 9. I have never in 5 years been able to hear it any way but the other, the wind. Moved down the street between them. So when you say your failing is that you let a thing sit, he said, I would ask you to consider that mine is that I have not let one sit for 5 years, and I could not tell you tonight which of us has got the worst of it. That is the first time you have told anybody that. It is. Why me? Because you looked at this side of my face in the mouth of a prospect hole in January, said Wade Mercer, and did not do the thing where a person looks away and then looks back. Tamsin Carew crossed the 2 feet of that step herself, and the narrator sets it down plainly, for there was not a thing in the world compelling her to do it. What passed between them then was brief, and it was the first kiss either of them had known in a long while. And what broke open in her was not longing, but the plain unbearable relief of being wanted entire by a man who had already been handed the worst account of her, and had asked for it in her own words instead. The storm of the 17th of February came in 9 hours ahead of what anybody had reckoned on. Orrin Vale had his prisoner in a hired rig on the Prescott Road by 7 that morning under a sky that was, Ike Bissell told him in the street, and told the county afterward, no kind of sky to start out under. Vale went anyway. He went because the coach was not running, and because a delay meant a week's board on the county, and because he had made the same call 11 times before, and had been right 11 times. He was wrong at 10:30. 6 miles south of town on the shoulder of the mountain, when the road went out from under the near wheel in a drift, and the rig went over, and the off-horse went down and broke a foreleg, and Orrin Vale went into the rocks and came up with a broken collarbone and a knee that would not hold him. Tamsin Carew was thrown clear into soft snow, and got up with nothing worse than a cut mouth, in a wind she could not stand upright in, 11 miles by road from anywhere, with a man on the ground who could not walk, and a horse that had to be shot, and one that had run. She had 2 hours of light. At the outside, and she was 3/4 of a mile below a black slot in a mountainside behind a screen of scrub oak that she had walked into 11 feet in January. She got Orrin Vale up that 3/4 of a mile in a little under 2 hours. The narrator will not dress that up. She cut the traces off the dead horse with Vale's own knife and made a drag of the seat cushions and the lap robe, and she hauled a man of 11 stone up a mountainside through drifted snow in a whiteout, in stages of 40 feet, with a rest between. And when he told her twice to leave him, she told him twice that she had no intention of explaining to the county attorney how she had come to lose her own arresting officer. She got him into the adit at 12:30. Then she went back out, twice, for the lap robe and the grain sack, and the broken shafts of the rig, and she built a wall across the mouth of that hole out of the spoil rock at the entrance and the seat leather and the sack, working from the sides in, leaving a hand's width at the top, exactly as her grandfather at Dulcoth and her father at Calumet had shown her that a man walls off a working to hold the air and the heat. And then she took out of the pocket of her coat a foot of hand-forged Cornish iron with a hooked handle and a spike and a socket, and drove the spike into a crack in the wall of that adit 40 feet from daylight, and set the 2-inch stub of tallow candle in it that had lived in the socket since Camborne, and struck a match. "That will burn about 4 hours," Orrin Vale said, from the floor. "It will burn about 4 hours, and then I will put out the light and we will sit in the dark. And we will be 50 degrees in here either way," said Tamsen Carew. "And you will not sleep, Mr. Vale, and I do not care how much you want to. My grandfather went down a wet shaft for 41 years, and he told me one thing about ground, and it was that ground will keep you if you keep awake in it. They were in that adit 18 hours. She kept him awake by making him talk, and what Orrin Vale talked about, somewhere in the small hours of a February night 40 feet inside a mountain with a candle guttering in a dead miner's candlestick, was the $4 in mileage, and the 11 prisoners before her, and the fact that he had read the Carew complaint at Prescott and had noticed at the time that a woman who steals $340 does not generally spend December washing pots for $2 a week at 7,000 feet, and had served it anyway. "I want that written down," he said, at about 4 in the morning, "when we get out. I want it written down, and I will sign it. You may not want it as much at noon. I will want it more at noon," said Orrin Vale. Wade Mercer came into that adit at 4:30 the following afternoon, with 6 men and a sledge behind him. He had gone out at daylight after the horse came into town at dusk the night before with a broken trace. He had gone out with a stick still in his hand and both ears gone raw from December, and every man in Williams telling him he had no business on that mountain in that weather, and he had walked the Prescott Road to the wreck and stood over a dead horse and a broken rig and no bodies, and had then turned and looked 3/4 of a mile up the shoulder at a screen of scrub oak, and had said out loud to 6 men who had no idea what he was talking about, "She went to the hole." They pulled the wall down at the mouth of the adit at 4:20, and the first thing any of them saw in the dark was a woman sitting upright against the wall with her hand on a deputy sheriff's good shoulder, shaking him, and a foot of iron driven into the rock above her head with a cold stub of candle in it. Nobody died. That is the whole of the sentence, and it is the only one that mattered to Wade Mercer, who sat down on the spoil heap outside that adit in front of 6 men and put his face in his one whole hand. Orrin Vale's statement was written down on the 21st of February and sworn before the justice at Williams and forwarded to the county attorney at Prescott, and it was the beginning of the end of the Carew complaint rather than the end of it. and the narrator will be honest that the law took until June. What finished it was Ike Bissell, who drove down to Prescott in April on his own time and without being asked, and the station agent from Beale Spring, who came the same week, and the two of them together put the 13th of December in front of the county attorney in a form he could not read around. The complaint was withdrawn in the June term. Hester Carew was not prosecuted for the false swearing, the county attorney taking the view that the family had troubles enough, which Tamsen thought was the wrong decision, and said so, and let go of. Reuben and Sylvanus Carew were another matter, the faro layout on Front Street having kept a ledger, as such places did. Neither went to prison. Both went to work, which their mother had never in her life required of them. Jory Carew wrote to his daughter once, in the August of 1884, from Ehrenberg. It was 4 lines long, and it said that he had been in the wrong room at the wrong minute, and had not opened his mouth, and that he did not ask her pardon because he did not think he had any business asking for it, and that he thought of her every day. She wrote back. They wrote perhaps twice a year for 11 years until he died, and she never went to see him and he never came, and the narrator declines to pretend that was mended, because it was not, and some things are not. Orrin Vale was not reappointed the following year, which he had expected, and he took the mail contract on the Ash Fork Road and carried it 11 years, and was the most cautious man about weather in the northern half of that territory. Wade Mercer and Tamsen Carew were married at Williams in the October of 1884. They ran cattle south of the mountain for 31 years. She kept the books, and he kept the range, and they had 2 daughters and a son, and she went into a hole in the ground somewhere on that mountain at least once a year for the whole of her life, purely for the pleasure of it, which her children thought was the strangest thing about their mother, and which their father never once remarked upon at all. The candlestick hung on a nail beside the kitchen door of that house for 31 years, and it was not an ornament. It was used. It went into every root cellar and every crawl space and every dark corner of that outfit for 3 decades, and it was taken down on the 17th of February every year of that marriage, and set on the table with a fresh candle in it and lit, and nothing was said over it, because nothing needed saying. Their eldest daughter carried it to a house of her own in 1911, and her son carried it to another in 1946, and there is a foot of hand forged Cornish iron with a hooked handle and a spike and a socket on a mantel in Yavapai County, Arizona, today, and the family that owns it can tell you, if you ask them, exactly what it was doing 40 feet inside Bill Williams Mountain on the night of the 17th of February, 1884. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where love arrived quiet and stayed long enough to change everything, then this story was for you. Out on the high pine country under Bill Williams Mountain, where the wind keeps the only memory of what was, the love between Wade Mercer and Tamsen Carew became the kind that does not need anybody to remember it to be real, though that town remembered it anyway. Every winter, every time the first hard storm came down off the mountain, and somebody in a warm room said the thing they always said, which was that there had been a man once who gave up his seat and rode up top. If stories of frontier love that endured through hardship, prejudice, and the kind of silence only the West knows speak to you, follow the Lonesome Trail for more. Here, the love stories are quiet, the courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail.